Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Barely? That would be the first time anybody claimed they couldn't hear me. So clearly it's the acoustics. Should I stand up? We're going to turn the volume. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to this forum tonight. We're going to fiddle a little bit with the sound system, but while we're doing that, I thought we might as well get started on this evening's program. My name is Cheryl Hanna. I'm on the faculty at Vermont Law School, and my thanks to Clean Yield Assets Management and VPIRG for hosting this forum on sort of a post-Citizens United, what's happening next. When Rick Hausman from Clean Yield Assets Management called and said, we should really do a forum on this topic. There's so much interest here in Vermont about the decision and its aftermath. And so Rick and I were talking and we said, you know what would be great is if we could bring together a group of people who are working on ways in which to respond to the decision, from a constitutional amendment, as you're going to hear from a little bit later, to questions, for example, of shareholder rights in the corporate setting, and then spend a little time talking specifically about what activities are happening here at the state level as well. So let me just give you a sense of how the evening is intended to progress. I'm just going to give a 2-minute overview of sort of where campaign finance law is relative to the Supreme Court. And then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk for about 10 minutes on the work that they're doing and the kinds of things that are happening in their areas of expertise, simply to inform you about what's going on. And then we'll have time to take questions from the audience and have a discussion from the audience. And then afterwards, we can all congregate back in the community room where Ben and Jerry have been kind enough to bring ice cream and cider, and we can have some more informal conversation. And I know you're here for the conversation and not the ice cream, right? And just a couple of other things. There's a sign-up sheet that's going around that has some boxes you can check, and I think the organizers would appreciate if you felt like you wanted to share your name and information. Please feel free to do so. Of course, if you don't feel free, you don't have to, but this was just a way for them to get some information about who was attending. And also, I should say that the purpose of this forum is really to inform folks, to give ideas, to let people know what's happening, and so for all of you in your own way to make up your own minds both about the decision and then if any of these efforts are things that you're interested in getting engaged in. So it's really intended to inform and you make up your own mind about things. Let me just give you a 2-minute background on sort of where campaign finance law is currently. And I'm going to take us back a little bit to 1976 to a case called Buckley versus Vallejo. In that case, it was the first time that the Supreme Court said that whenever governments place restrictions on campaign spending or campaign expenditures, that we have to look at money as if it were speech. Because it's speech, because the money facilitates speech. And so in that decision, the court begins to equate money with speech under a First Amendment analysis. And in that decision, the court begins to sort of break up some different issues. So if I'm a candidate running for office, of which I'm not, but if I were a candidate running for office, the court has said I can spend as much of my own money that I want to get out my message. It also said that I can raise as much money as I want and spend it to get out my message because that's my First Amendment right to do, and you can't place restrictions on my campaign expenditures. However, the court has said that if Ben and Jerry, for example, want to support me when running for office, that the state can place reasonable restrictions on direct candidate contributions. So the state can say, you can only give Cheryl so much money individually to her if she's running for office. Now, as we know here in Vermont, with the Cheryl decision a few years ago, the court is not necessarily going to defer to legislatures on how low those contributions can be. As you know, the court struck down our campaign contribution limits as being too low, signaling that they're going to take a second look at what legislatures do. They're not going to defer to the state in that respect. Now, so that's sort of direct campaign spending. And then there's all these other groups. They can be corporations, for-profit, they can be nonprofit corporations, they can be PACs, they can be advocacy groups. And those folks, the court said, can essentially raise as much money as they want, and they can spend as much money as they want to get out their message about their support of a candidate or an issue. And so in the same way that simply my friend Jennifer could, buy an ad in a newspaper that says, I support Cheryl for office, so can a corporation spend as much of their money as they want to get out that same message. And so as long as Jennifer's placing an ad in the newspaper, is it coordinated with my campaign? So we call those non-coordinated campaign expenditures on behalf of corporations and other organizations, labor unions, nonprofits, etc. So the landscape has really been, after Citizens United, that these other groups are able to raise and spend as much money as they want to facilitate their message, because the court essentially equated any kind of corporate entity the same as a person for the purposes of political speech. So Jennifer can speak in the same way that Ford Motor Company can speak, in the same way that the Sierra Club can speak, in the same way that a union can speak, and that it would not allow government to restrict the speech because of the group from which it came. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's sort of where we're left with after the Citizens United decision, and I think the two major points from that is, one is that the court equates speech with money for a First Amendment analysis, and the second is that the court treats all groups of people essentially equally in terms of their ability to get their message out, from individuals to nonprofits to for-profit corporations. So with that said, let me now first introduce you to our first panelist, who really need no introduction. My children know Ben and Jerry because of their ice cream, but I think all of us here in Vermont who have any appreciation for the multitude of things that they do know Ben and Jerry for their advocacy around corporate responsibility, for their businesses for social responsibility outlook, for giving back to the community in a multitude of ways, and now for their work on addressing the consequences of Citizens United.
Hi, I'm Ben. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a person.
I'm Jerry. I'm a person.
Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream Incorporated?
Not a person. So it's clear to us, as it is to so many other people, that corporations are not people. Ben and I got actively involved in this issue just about a year ago when folks at Ben and Jerry's actually took the initiative and came to us to see if we would want to be involved in an activity that was taking place. It was the formation of a business group to oppose Citizens United decision and to advocate for a constitutional amendment, and this group is called Business for Democracy. It was formed on the first anniversary of the decision, which was last January. Ben and I went down to Washington, D.C. with about 20 other business people to hold a press conference introducing the organization, signing a pledge. Clean Yield Asset Management, who is one of the sponsors tonight, was down there with us. And that campaign is ongoing. It's been taken over by an organization called ASBC, the American Sustainable Business Council, which represents about 65,000 businesses in different organizations, different business organizations around the country. They now have about over 900 people that have signed on to this petition, and this work is ongoing. We're very excited to be part of this. I think before I turn it over to Ben, I'm just going to mention, for those of you who are wondering, the flavors tonight. Cherry Garcia, chocolate fudge brownie, chocolate chip cookie dough, and Americone Dream. So as you're listening to all of us talk, you can be thinking about what flavors you want. We're not going to talk too much because we have some real experts here to talk about the specifics of the issue and what we can all be doing. But we're just thrilled to see such enthusiasm and really happy that you folks are out tonight.
Well, to me, it's really simple. Should corporations have the same rights as people? I think the reality is that, according to polls, over 80% of the population says no. And that, I think that, when you look at the root causes of the problems in our society, it seems that excess corporate power is the problem. So I've been aware of this campaign, and I've been supportive of the campaign to overturn Citizens United and rescind corporate personhood. The only problem I felt was that the only way to do that is to pass a constitutional amendment, and that's kind of hard to do. And then the Occupy Wall Street movement started happening. And that movement is pretty much unprecedented in our country. I think it's the first time in my lifetime that there's been a mass grassroots movement to deal with the issue of economic disparity and economic justice. I've been spending a lot of time with the folks at Occupy Wall Street, and it's amazing to realize that it's only 60 days old, and already it's had an incredible effect in terms of the national debate and raising the issue of economic disparity. A lot of people look at the Occupy Wall Street movement and they say, it's good that they're pointing out some problems, but it would be nice if they were advocating for a solution. And I think the reality is that this is a really young movement, and that it's in the process of coalescing. But when you talk to the people inside the movement, and when you look at the list of issues that the movement has actually officially stated, the huge majority of them come down to the issue of excess corporate power and greed. And I think there is a real recognition inside the movement that if the movement does end up supporting a particular issue, The two of the major candidates are overturning corporate personhood and campaign finance reform. But the nature of this incredible horizontal leaderless movement is that it's asking people to get active and support solutions to the problems that they're raising. And so Occupy Wall Street would welcome tremendously this effort to rescind corporate personhood. And I think because of this unprecedented grassroots movement that's just in its early infancy, that has the potential of truly sweeping the country, that there is actually now, I think, a good chance that we can get this constitutional amendment passed. So I'm really psyched and encouraged, and really glad to see everybody here, and looking forward to us all working together and having Vermont once again lead the way.
So we've mentioned the constitutional amendment, and there are a number of different amendments that have been proposed out there, but our next speaker, David Cobb, is from MoveToAmend.org, which is an organization that's been involved in really trying to mobilize at the local and national level to have a constitutional amendment passed, which would address both the questions of money as speech and also the question of corporate personhood. So, David, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and David's going to use the board here, and I'm going to turn off my mic. We're going to try to be high tech.
Think not. So let's do this. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher, so how about in the back? Can y'all hear me? Because I'm comfortable like this. And in 10 minutes, I'm going to give an overview about constitutional law and why the idea of a corporation being able to claim constitutional rights is actually a perversion of the democratic promise of a republic in the United States of America. Y'all ready?
Praise the Lord!
Here we go. The supreme law of the land in the United States of America, the governing document, the document that gives us our charter. What is that document called? The U.S. Constitution. How many people have read the Constitution in the last year? Raise your hands. Professors, I'm watching. All right, y'all grade my papers. See if I get this more or less right. I'm going to tell you that to understand how the Constitution operates in a big picture way, it's important to recognize that there are two principal actors or concepts that are at play. The first actor is the most important actor. That's the first three words of that document.
We the people.
I do this presentation all across the country. All I have to do, y'all, is put my hand to my ears, and people in unison will say those three words. We the people. Those are hallowed words in the United States of America, and they ought to be. We the people begins that document. It's the most important concept because, see, we the people come together to create the second actor, or the second concept, which is government itself. Under the framework of the U.S. Constitution, we the people are described as being free and sovereign. And sovereign, folks, means the ability to rule, the authority to make decisions. We're taught from grade school that we are self-governing, that we are sovereign, we the people are sovereign. And a way to understand that is government is not sovereign. In fact, to the contrary, government is subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? The people. Government is accountable to whom? We the people. I like how that's going. Let's keep going. It's got a ring to it, don't you think? We the people are free and sovereign because we have rights. Government does not have rights. Government has duties. In fact, government does not have rights against the people at all. You see, if I have the right to do something, it means I can do it, and I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need this panel's permission. I don't need the city of Montpelier's permission. I don't need the state of Vermont's permission. Look, I'm from Texas. I don't need my mama's permission. I mean, if you've got a right to do something, it means you can just damn well do it. And if government tries to interfere with my exercise of my rights, government's wrong, not me. Period. End of story. That's why, as a civil libertarian, I will tell you, I will stand strong and proud with anyone of any party, of any ideology, when government attempts to interfere with your exercise of your rights as a human being. That is a violation. Government is wrong. Government cannot do that. And when government does do it, and they do overreach from time to time, if you haven't been paying attention, when government does that, it is appropriate to be able to go into court and have a lawyer overturn that law. Right? And that's very important. Our rights are sacrosanct. The Constitution doesn't create those rights. The Constitution recognizes those rights. Another way to say it is that they are inherent. They are inalienable. Some folks of some persuasion would say that those are God-given rights or natural law rights. Regardless of how you see the big cosmological perspective, at the end of the day, understand this. These are human rights. That's what it means, right? Government does not have rights. Government has duties. And another way to think about this, folks, is all power resides with the people. You know, power to the people was not just a Black Panther Party chant, although it was. It was also an American Revolutionary chant. Because, you know, I think those words have some magic. I really do. And in fact, you know, at many of the Black Panther Party meetings, they would start, whoever was facilitating the meeting would say 4 words, and then the group would say it back, and then they'd proceed. And I'm going to invite you to just, if you're so moved, to repeat them after me and just see what it feels like. I'll say, power to the people.
Power to the people.
One more time. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
How'd that feel? Right? It feels good. And the reason I do this, even in a limited amount of time, is so that we can actually have the experience. Because democracy, really participatory, horizontal democracy, is an experience. And we have to rediscover that for ourselves. We have been trained to be obedient. We have been trained to defer to power. And that is not our legacy as Americans. People fought and died for our ability to exercise that kind of power, and we need to exercise it. All power resides with the people, but we delegate a certain amount of that power to government. Well, why would we do that at all? If all power resides with the people, why would we delegate any power? Well, let me ask, what is the population of Montpelier?
8,000.
8,000? You know, I'm a political activist and a proud, engaged citizen. I love to go to political meetings. But I'll tell you what, I do not want to go to the meeting of 8,000 people where we decide where to put the stop signs. Y'all with me on this? Yep. The idea is that we, the people, although we have power, all of the power, we delegate a certain amount of power to government. Why would we do that? To perform the duties that we have said government should do. See, think of it this way. The Constitution is the codification of the social contract. How our government on the big picture is supposed to operate. And then, in a representative democracy, representatives are charged with the responsibility for discharging the duties that have been delegated to them. Another way to think about this, we the people are sovereign with individual rights. In this context, think of it this way. This is the private sphere where I have my individual rights. And that's fantastic, but it doesn't end there. There's also a public sphere, right? There's a public sphere. So my civil libertarian impulses are satisfied by this framework, but so are my communitarian impulses. You know, it's not either or. Either we have to have a complete laissez-faire system, or we have to have a completely state-managed system. No. The brilliance of the United States Constitution is that it recognizes individual civil libertarians' rights, and to do so in a communitarian ethos where the big picture system of how we frame our government operates. I look at this and I think, this is brilliant. This is fantastic. This is beautiful. We should try that in this country. This would work. And I'm not even joking, because the problem, folks, is that one of the problems is when this beautiful framework is first laid out for us, the Constitution is ratified in what year? Does anybody know? 1789 is the ratification. In 1789, who got to be a person wrapping themselves in this beautiful document? You had to be a man. You had to be white.
Property.
You had to be property owner. You see, the entire history of the United States can be looked at through the lens of who is a person. Who gets to actually claim the brilliance of these protections? Who gets to actually participate? Personhood is at the core of understanding how our government operates and how our society operates. In fact, I would tell you this, if you look at all of the great movements, the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, the trade union movement, the women's empowerment movement, at its core, it's about driving themselves into the Constitution. Howard Zinn said, one way to understand the United States history is as a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights protected by our Constitution. That's how important it is. So some people might say, all right, Cobb, relax, because everybody's a person now. And now let's reintroduce the corporation. Let's remember this, folks. It takes an act of the state legislature to create a corporation, right? The state has to actually issue that charter. That charter can be used to hold the corporation subordinate and accountable. For the first 75 years of this country, corporate charters were only allowed for 5, 7, 10 years. They could only do certain very specific things to get the privilege, not the right, but the privilege of limited liability. If you want to do business, fine, but if you want the privilege of limited liability, that entity was tightly controlled. And at the end of that time period, the corporate charter automatically dissolved. And get this, not only that, but all you could ever do was the very specific thing that you had identified. You had to prove a public need that was not being met by either existing private business or by governmental action. So the charter could be used to hold it accountable. The duties were strictly proscribed of what the corporate charter could do. And get this, anytime a corporation was ever found to act outside the public interest, do you know what happened to the corporate charter? Dissolved. The corporate death penalty. It was used routinely for the first 75 years of this country. And so, folks, can you see why I would tell you that a corporation properly understood has to be on this side of the line so that we can actually control this, the most dominant institution that has ever been created? So when the U.S. Supreme Court, in an act of supreme judicial activism, take that, right wing, this is a judicially active court who creates out of whole cloth the idea that says, oh no, a corporation needs to be considered a person with rights just like you. It perverts this whole document. Corporate personhood is not just a stupid idea, which it is. Corporate personhood is not just illogical, which it is. Corporate personhood is the linchpin for how the ruling elite, and I don't mean just the wealthy, I mean the crazy, stupid wealthy, right? The 1/10 of the 1% who actually own over half of the wealth in this country, and they are using this doctrine not only to oppress us, but to legalize it. And as a lawyer, that pisses me off. The legal system. Our legal system is supposed to be the place where we go for justice, to be administered impartially and fairly, no matter what your race, creed, gender, socioeconomic class. And so when the Supreme Court steals that from us, we should be angry. And yes, it's going to take a constitutional amendment because the court has stolen our Constitution from us. And they've done so using the 14th Amendment that said, no person shall be denied equal protection of the laws. I've got more to say, but I want to respect the time limit. I see the law professor looking at me. I know that means I have to be quiet, but I got more to say. Peace.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I kind of want to pass a plate now. The problem is I don't know what we would do with all the money. No, thank you. And as David said, there's going to be a lot of time for question and answer. So we did want people to give relatively brief conversations so we could then talk among ourselves. So our final panelist tonight is Jennifer Taub. Jennifer is my colleague at Vermont Law School who joined us just this year. She's formerly with Fidelity Investments and then at the faculty of the University of Massachusetts. Jennifer and I actually grew up in the same town and went to law school together, although we didn't know each other as kids. But she's a progressive corporate lawyer, and you probably haven't met many of them. But we are delighted, I'm personally delighted to welcome her to Vermont, and delighted also to welcome her to the panel because she's going to be sharing with you some other kinds of initiatives, short of a constitutional amendment, that address some of the other concerns raised by Citizens United. Jennifer?
Thank you, Cheryl. Can you all hear me in the back? Yeah? Great. I just, by way of thanking David and saying what a great job he did, I said, thanks a lot. How am I going to follow that? But what I want to say is the ideas I'm going to talk about right now are not substitutes for what David is talking about. They are complements and perhaps what to do in the meanwhile. So we have a situation right now where we can look back 2 years after Citizens United and see what the impact has been. If you look at the last midterm election before Citizens United, that was in 2006, there was about $69 million spent on political advertising and activities in that midterm election cycle by these outside organizations that Cheryl was talking about. These are the organizations that don't coordinate with the campaign or the political party. So again, back in 2006, that number was about $69 million. In 2010, outside organizations spent over $300 million. And of that, about half was secret money, money we don't know what the source is. So if you can just compare that, more secret money flooded in to the campaign after Citizens United than there was total outside money spent in the previous election cycle. So I want to talk about that, what we can do about shining a light on this money and what efforts are underway right now by advocates, including Public Citizen and others, to try to change the law so that we can see who is spending the money. And the analogy I like to use is one analogy I like to use is borrowed from the comedian Stephen Colbert. I don't know if you heard that he set up his own super PAC. And this is a super PAC thanks to Citizens United and a following companion decision by the DC Circuit can now take in all this new corporate money, more than it could before, unlimited amounts, and spend it on these political ads supporting or attacking candidates in federal elections. And when he described his super PAC and how excited he was that he had it, he described it as his new ability to shout through a megaphone made of cash. And we can now see who is holding that megaphone of cash. That's the disclaimer you see at the bottom of an advertisement paid for by the citizens supporting Cheryl Hanna for office. We can see who's holding the megaphone, but we cannot always see who is providing the cash. And that needs to change. And the reason why that is because there's, lawyers are very clever and have found ways to have a number of conduits stand between the corporations, for example, and other institutions that are giving their money to the super PACs. So these so-called super PACs have to disclose in periodic reports where they get their money from, but all they need to do is get their money from another entity, like a 501c4 entity, a social welfare organization, just like Citizens United was. They get their money from that organization, and you can find out that that advertisement attacking Cheryl Hanna was paid for by this 527, and you can find out that that 527 got $10 million from the, I mean, it sounds like alphabet soup or a bunch of numbers here, but from the 501c4. But that 501c4 does not have to tell you who the corporation was that gave it the money. Okay, this is money laundering to fund political campaign ads. So what's being done right now are a number of things. The main thing that's been focused on is disclosure. In the Supreme Court decision, there was, as you know, it was a 5-4 decision. And Kennedy wrote the majority opinion. There was one section of the opinion, Section 4, you can look at it if you're curious, that was signed onto by 8 of the 9 justices. The only person who did not sign onto it was Justice Thomas. This section of the opinion said that improved disclosure and disclaimer laws would be perfectly constitutional. I'm going to return to this part of the opinion in a moment, but just talking about disclosure, a door opened or remained open in how to regulate the flow of secret money into political campaign ads. And as a result of this, there are a number of academics, a number of activists, and even members of Congress who are trying to make some difference. So one of the things that's happened is a group of law professors, about 10 of them, who are experts in corporate law, wrote a letter to the Securities and Exchange Commission this summer requesting that the SEC mandate that publicly traded corporations disclose all their political spending. And this went in, as I said, this summer, and now support letters have come in, including one signed by Clean Yield Asset Management, and including another signed by an organization that represents investors with more than $3 trillion in assets. And what these organizations are saying is, we want to know. We're the shareholders, and we don't know where the money is going. Now, let's switch and think about people like us. Some people have money they're saving for in a 401k plan. Maybe they have a little bit of money in a mutual fund. And as an investor, you really have no way to know what the corporations in which your fund is invested are doing, supporting causes and candidates you might not support. So the way I think of this is, I put lawn signs on my lawn. Occasionally, I give money to candidates I support for political office. And I don't have a lot to give, but when I give what I give, I'm hoping that it's my way of supporting them. Or I stand outside and I hold a sign. Or I use my voice and I say, this is a great candidate. Cheryl's a great candidate for office, etc. And I have other real names you can ask me afterward who I'm supporting. But at any rate, I might be very proud of someone I'm supporting for office. Meanwhile, quietly, secretly, I have a little bit of money in a mutual fund, and a company that fund owns is putting an attack ad, right, on TV, attacking the candidate I support, or supporting an issue I don't. And right now, I cannot find that out unless that corporation voluntarily makes those disclosures. To me, that is compelled speech. I'm a real person. I have rights under the Constitution. I should not be forced to speak. And if they're going to call money speech, then I don't want my money talking in a way I don't want it to talk. And that's a problem. And let's go back to that part of the decision I promised I'd return to. The court had to address this question as it was brought up. What about these, minority shareholders? They didn't even talk about the people like me who don't own stock directly but own it through a mutual fund. But they did talk about minority shareholders. By that they meant, what about those shareholders of publicly traded companies that have obviously no control over what goes on in the enterprise? What about the fact that their money is being used and they don't have knowledge or consent? And the court sort of nodded their head and said, well, they can be protected through what the court called the procedures of corporate democracy. Okay, so what are those procedures of corporate democracy? Believe it or not, there are funny procedures. There are procedures that are called democracy, and that would involve voting to, well, the shareholders can't fire the CEO who now spends money on a candidate they don't like. They don't even know that he or she is spending that money. So what are these procedures? Well, in theory, you could, fire one or all the members of the board of directors. But as many of you probably are aware, if there are 10 directors, if there are 10 seats available every year for the board of directors, there are only 10 candidates on the ballot. And who puts them on the ballot? The board themselves. And recently, the SEC tried to remedy this as part of the Dodd-Frank Act in the summer of 2010, which would have allowed shareholders to nominate their own directors to get on the ballot, and it would have been up to 25%. So if there's 10 seats, that could be up to 2 director nominees, and they wouldn't have to launch an expensive proxy contest. Those names would be right on the ballot next to management slate. And what happened? The SEC was sued. Who sued them? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable. Who funds? Okay, you know. So it went to the D.C. Circuit, and it was struck down on a very ideological grounds. But the bottom line is that procedure of corporate democracy, you can't hire the people who are supposed to represent your interests, the board. You can what's called vote with your feet, which means selling your shares, and you really aren't registering your dissatisfaction with political spending. You're just walking away. That doesn't work. The other thing that shareholders have been doing, though, is introducing at the annual meeting resolutions to say, we want to see where you're spending the money. And so far, only at one corporation did that pass. It was at Sprint, but there's a dispute over how the votes were counted. So right now, the procedures of corporate, and by the way, these resolutions are non-binding. So even if the shareholders passed one of these, the CEO wouldn't have to change. And so to kind of wrap things up, what my friend Cheryl Torres-Spelisi, who used to work at the Brennan Center and is now a professor at Stetson, likes to say of the before and after Citizens United. Before Citizens United, a corporate CEO who wanted to fund a political ad supporting or attacking a candidate would have to reach into his or her pocket, take out his own checkbook, and write a check for that ad. After Citizens United, he's got to reach into the other pocket, and he can take out the corporate checkbook and write a check as big as he wants. And the board of directors doesn't have to approve it. The shareholders don't know about it or approve it. And certainly the public, therefore, has no way of seeing it. And that has to change.
Before we open up the forum to a general discussion, Senator Ginny Lyons from Chittenden County is here. Yeah. And she's here to share with us some efforts that are happening at the State House around some of these issues. And Ginny, can you grab that?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank you all for being here. This is an important event. It's not a Republican event. It's not a Democratic with a big D event. It's not a progressive event. It's not an independent event. It's an event for democracy with a little d. It's for us. It's for you. It's for all the people in this room and all the people who will gain when we pass a resolution that says the Constitution is for people, not for corporations. Money does not equal speech. The infusion of money into the electoral process results in a lack of transparency in our open elections. It's time for us to pass a resolution. I've been working with a group of towns. We will be sending out a resolution for all of you to take a hold of, take to town meeting. I hope to work with the folks that are here today. I'm looking forward to that. We also have a resolution in the State House where Senator Polina has been working very hard, where a number of other senators have been working very hard to pass a resolution to send to our congressional delegation that says, please pass a constitutional amendment that states that corporations are not persons, that money does not equate with free speech. Thank you all. I look forward to working with you all, and I really want to thank the folks who are here tonight putting on this forum. This is awesome. VPERG and the others, thank you very much.
Sit up here. I think people are going to have questions.
Great. Thank you, Judy. We're so glad you could be here to share that. Before we end the event later this evening, I would like some folks from Clean Yield Asset Management and VPERG to talk about their efforts. But before we do that, I would love to open this up to all of you, either to make comments or to ask questions of our panelists. This is democracy in action, so I'd invite you to stand up, and hopefully you'll be loud enough that we can maybe just give us your first name, what town you're from, and then say what you'd like. And I'm a teacher, I'll just call on you. So, yeah.
Judy from Basin. I think that every high school, from 7th grade through 12th, should have that and know what that is all about, the two of them.
Was everybody able to hear? Was it Judy? No. Let me read. If that's okay, I'll just take the liberty of repeating Judy's comment. Judy said that every child in grade school ought to have the kind of lesson that David shared with us tonight about the meaning of the Constitution. Did I paraphrase it?
Grade 7 through 12.
Grade 7 through 12.
Or lower.
I don't know. I think my 8-year-old gets this, right? This is sort of intuitive, right? I've got my rights, right? Great. Good. Can I other questions? Yes, sir.
I was struck during this discussion by how abstract, in a way, the discussion was, in that we didn't talk about the nature of the corporations, which is, according to some people, quite sociopathic. If the corporation were a person, it would be kind of a sociopath. And to bring it even closer to home, there are sociopathic corporations that actually function in Vermont, believe it or not. And one of them, I believe, is... I've done it!
I just want to add some sound effects to your comment.
Thank you. One of them, I believe, is Green Mountain Power.
Yes!
Which has basically ramrodded a wind project in Lowell and also in Sheffield in very poor communities. And, I'm embarrassed to say, but it's the reason I'm really standing up is because when I heard about this, I found that VPERG itself, one of the sponsors of this, is actually considers these wind projects to be a tremendous opportunity for Vermont. And so I would like to hear a little discussion about how greenwashing fits into this whole corporate.
I think there's going to be some opportunity at the end of the evening for both VPERG and Clean Yield Asset Management to talk about some of their efforts. Did anybody on the panel want
I guess, let me try to do it this way. I appreciate I actually do a much longer presentation. When the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom brought me here last year, we traveled Vermont, and I can give it, so thanks to Wilt for the work that they do. But I think that your point is important. Let's understand this. that a corporation is just a concentration of individuals that are brought together under law. We can decide collectively what privileges they have. What I'm saying is they don't have any inherent constitutional rights. So I don't think that it's fair to say a corporation is sociopathic. I mean, like, if it's a hot summer day, I know it's kind of cold now, but I've been here in the summer, it gets hot, right? If it's a hot summer day and I'm cutting a tomato and my new friend Jennifer comes over and says, David, what are you doing? I say, I'm cutting this tomato to make a gazpacho soup. I grew the tomatoes myself, they're organic, would you join me? Is that knife good or bad? Well, it's good, right? I'm going to share this soup I'm making. Now, it's the same scenario, hot summer day. Jennifer comes over and she says, David, what are you doing? And I say, ah! And I lunge at her with the knife. Is the knife good or bad? It's a trick question, of course. The knife is neither good nor bad. The corporation as a form is not good or bad. The problem is that we have allowed our political, legal system to basically be hijacked by a small ruling elite who are using the corporate form. Right? The corporation can be put to phenomenally productive uses. There is an important role that corporations should play, both for-profit corporations, not-for-profit corporations. I think that we make a mistake if we vilify corporations. I actually appreciate... Was it Ben or Jerry? One of y'all talked about the excesses. Sorry, they probably get that wrong. but the excesses of corporate power. What we're talking about is the transnational corporation. It is a particularly insidious version of the corporation that is actually at the heart of the problem. So, I think that we make a mistake if we're not more precise with our language. Because I work for a nonprofit corporation. I don't think that I don't want to be anti-corporate. I want to be pro-democracy.
You spoke to...
Can I ask you this? We're going to see if this works.
Well, I'd be surprised if I need that, but I'm happy to use it.
Well, it's just because the folks in the back. Let's see if this works.
Works great. How about I just speak up?
You don't think so? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Hope I remember my question. You touched on the issue of the 14th Amendment, which is what the Supreme Court hung its hat on in this decision. Could you elaborate as to the rationale of the five, as to what the 14th Amendment has to say, how they rationalize this rather obscene decision?
I can do it, but Jennifer, would you like to?
So I'm straying into constitutional law and not my corporate governance and financial regulation field, but the way I think sometimes there's been a conflation of this decision with prior Supreme Court decisions that had recognized corporate personhood for purposes of other constitutional amendments. So with the 14th Amendment case was the Santa Clara Railroad case. In terms of this decision, the court majority tried to rationalize striking down these parts of the McCain-Feingold law by saying that a corporation was merely an association of citizens or an association of real people who, since they individually had First Amendment rights, should not lose those rights simply because they joined together to exercise them. What's interesting is it was only in the dissent where the dissenters said, the four justices said, I'm on to you guys, corporations aren't people. So if you look at the majority opinion, they relied on a different theory of what a corporation is. And there are many different theories of how to conceptualize under the law what a corporation is. And they didn't say a corporation was a person. They just said, oh, these transnational corporations are just like this nice group in here. I don't know, do we have 400 or 500 people? That somehow they said a corporation was like us getting together and deciding that whatever David says, if we approve it, he's speaking for us. But The problem with this conceptualization is it doesn't reflect reality. In particular, it misses about 200 years of evolution in the corporation, and in particular, if you look at the top 1,000 corporations in the US, 70% of their shares are owned by other institutions. So only 30% of the shares are directly held by real human beings. So those institutions are typically intermediaries holding those shares for other people. It's really hard to find the humans in the majority. Moreover, you know, the idea that we're just all getting together as shareholders to just run some business like Exxon is really silly. We know that we don't, as residual claimants, if we are shareholders, we don't have any say on what that business does. So when you ask about the 14th Amendment, that the corporate personhood, even though we focused on this case and said this is about corporate personhood, the majority actually tried to dodge that. We all know this is, in the broadest sense, about corporate personhood to the extent that we're defining that as letting corporations have rights under the various amendments that everyone would have thought were reserved to real-life people. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think gentleman right there, yeah.
Is there another way of addressing this issue? Is it an overturning of the ruling of the court if another case came to the surface, possibly with a different configuration of the court?
Right. So the question was, is there another way to overturn the decision simply by the court itself overturning it if there was a different configuration of the court? And yes, that certainly could be the case. You know, what's been interesting about Citizens United is that the court's actually, I think the court has heard some of the reaction against Citizens United. There is a subsequent case involving AT&T, right, where AT&T claimed that they had personal privacy rights in some of their internal communications, and that they didn't want to turn over in a discovery, in a litigation. And their claim was, essentially, after Citizens United, we have the same 14th Amendment right to personal privacy as would an individual. Now, in a unanimous decision by the court and by an intentionally funny Chief Justice Roberts, the court said, nah, that's not what we were talking about. You know, corporations don't have personal privacy rights in the way that individuals would have personal privacy rights, and then went on to close the decision by saying, we hope that AT&T doesn't take this decision too personally. So one of the things I think we are likely to see going forward is the court picking and choosing when to apply this concept of corporations as having constitutional rights in different contexts. Let me just give you, so you're right, of course the court could change and the court could overturn itself, and it's, you know, that may happen. Historically, 20 years is a very short time for the court to overturn itself. It has done that. Generally speaking, when you see decisions that are overturned, it's usually closer to a 30 to 40 year, you know, it's really a no generation of the court that ultimately overturns. But just one other quick footnote. The court's going to hear a case this term involving Shell Oil. Under the Alien Tort Act, which was an act that was passed that allows anybody to bring a case in an American federal court for a serious violation of international human rights. And Shell Oil is alleged to have engaged in human rights abuses in Africa around its oil drilling. And so one of the questions in that case is, are corporations persons for the purposes of international rights? Because under international human rights, only persons can be held liable. So the Second Circuit, in deciding the case, in a footnote said, Citizens United notwithstanding, you know, corporations aren't people for the purposes of international human rights violations. See now there's like, I mean, I would have been fine if they said, and you're liable for human rights abuse, right? Well, they said, well, okay, if you're going to be a corporation with rights, you're also a corporation with human duties. But the Second Circuit rejected that. I suspect the Supreme Court's going to follow the reasoning of the Second Circuit. And so I think, sort of expanding upon your question, probably what we're going to see from the court in the next 5 to 10 years is some real drawing of lines, right? What exactly did they mean here? How are they going to extend this decision? And I don't think they're going to see them extended out, for example, to the international human rights context. I'm sorry that was a long answer to your question. I think there's a woman behind the pole right there. Yes. Yeah.
I like you. Style. But I have to disagree with you about corporations being neutral. Because corporations have one goal, and that's to profit. And that's exploitative, and it does nothing but cause problems. And you mentioned transnationals. Green Mountain Power, for example, is a transnational. It's owned by Gas Metro, which is owned by several holding companies, which at the top of the list is owned by Enbridge, which is a nasty tar sands company that is trying to build a Keystone-style pipeline out to British Columbia so they can sell gas, tar oil, to China. Now, there's a merger that's about to happen here in Vermont unless we stop it. That merger is purchasing CVPS. And if that happens, this company, Enbridge, will be a partial owner of 72% of the manufacture and distribution of our utilities. This is bullshit. Two easy things you can do. Contact the Public Service Board. Tell them you want them to stop this merger from happening and that they need to appoint an independent public advocate on this issue. 2, people can start writing letters to the editor. If anybody would like a sample letter to talking points, you can meet me at the door later. Thank you.
I'm a farmer, and my family has farmed 5 generations here in central Vermont. What I've noticed about corporations is they're organized to escape responsibility. I have a responsibility to my customers for what I produce. A corporation has none of that responsibility. We're in the middle of a planet-wide extinction event. Corporations are engines of biocide.
There's now a bill that's been reintroduced into the Congress called the Shareholder Protection Act that would require advance notice and consent from shareholders. That doesn't get to the larger issue, of course, of to whom should the corporation be accountable and the amount of money that can be spent if shareholders go ahead and approve it. But it gets to the disclosure piece. And I think people are really working hard to find a way to get the information out there, and it's a shame that that order was not signed.
There was another.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
This is just throwing out another idea that Dave and everybody is going to go and tour around lecturing, as you are, educating people. Many, many years ago was written a cantata about the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. Do you remember that? Let's dig it up and do it. We'll make it a song and dance act as well as school. And you know, if anybody's interested, try to grab all those things for us. I'm very, very serious. Singing the Constitution is a good way to remember it.
Well, there's a big movement about using art for advocacy, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about, different ways to reach people. Yeah, there's a gentleman against the wall here.
Oh, yes. About a week and a half ago, the Vermont Progressive Party met at the State House. I think some of you were there. Anybody here with us? I've recognized a couple. I've seen Mitzi over there. Just spoke a few moments ago. Anyway, we resolved to put this issue on town meeting ballots throughout the state for town meeting day. And we could use everybody's help. So if you could click on to progressiveparty.org, I think it is, Google it, you'll get it easy enough. And we could use all the help. I've been working on it in Pittsfield since I got back from our weekend, Thanksgiving and all. And I found out that we need 16 signatures on a petition to get it on the ballot. And I think that's the first place you start. Put a network together of people, get these signatures, get it on the town ballot, town meeting ballots, so that we can tell the world what we think about this corporate personhood thing and shut it down once and for all.
Because I want to bring us back to the issue here, because to me the role of the corporation is that I am an unabashed progressive, radical. We can pick the word, I don't care. I want systemic change, and we could talk about these issues, but you brought up this idea that the only role for the corporation is to provide a return to their shareholders. That legal doctrine is known as shareholder primacy. Do you know where that came from? A court created it. Right? I mean, a court created that doctrine. I think that what to me is most exciting about this moment is that we, the people, are beginning to have first principle conversations about the economic engines that are the most dominant institutions of our time, that we have been taught and trained to obey, basically. That this is the way it must be. And I think, honestly, this is not just rhetoric for me. I believe that we are in a pre-revolutionary time in the United States.
Yeah.
I believe that we are engaged. I believe that we are engaged in the kind of conversation about what kind of society do we want. How can we do the things that we want to do? I actually will say it again. I believe that the corporate form is going to be very important. I mean, look, the word corporation comes out of Latin. You know why? Because the first corporations ever created that we would understand were created during the Roman Republic. Not, by the way, during the Roman Empire. And sometimes I wish we spent more time asking what happens when a republic devolves into an empire, because that might also be an important conversation. But I do want to be clear. Corporations originally were used to build roads, the aqueduct system, hospitals, universities, public entities, public good. The corporation was actually put to appropriate use. I think that what's so exciting to me, and Ben mentioned the Occupy movement, I'm with you, Ben. I actually believe that this has opened up imagination space to have those kinds of conversations. And I will say, if we, through the rest of our time together, can really ask, how can we advance State Senator Jenny Lyons' resolution? Thank you, that you introduced last year, Jenny. I understand Anthony is introducing one as well that's similar. Is that right? It's the same one? All right, so good. So y'all are working together. I can't wait to work with the Progressive Party, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, any nonpartisan efforts to actually use town hall meeting to have these kind of conversations all across the country. All I will ask is to make sure corporations don't have constitutional rights. Money is not speech. It's a simple concept. Americans are understanding this all across the country. We're going to take our country back in a nonviolent, revolutionary manner. I believe that.
One more comment from the floor from this woman here. She's got her hand up a long. I'm sorry. I wish I could do better. Yeah. And then afterwards, I'm just going to ask Clean Yield and VPERG to come up, say just a couple of closing remarks, and then we can continue this conversation informally. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I also wanted to bring it back to something Ben said, which is that the two main, principles, you could say, of the OWS movement is, one of which is campaign finance reform. And so my question has to do with bringing it home to Vermont, because at this point, because of the absolute undue influence of corporate monies, we have it infiltrating into the way public good decisions are made. I'm not going to name anything. I'm just going to present that as a question. I really want us to bring it home right here. We are very small. We can do something to prevent ourselves from being governed by those who are governed by corporations.
Did you want to just say a couple of words about some of VPERG's efforts, and then Rick, if you want to just come up and talk a little bit about what Clean Yield is doing, and then we can continue this conversation over. I know I choose Cherry Garcia.
Thanks. I'm Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPERG. I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank our partners at Clean Yield Asset Management, our panelists. I also want to thank the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom for really kickstarting this effort almost a year ago, I guess, and so really appreciate that. A lot has been said, and I don't want to take too much time here, but we've got the resolutions that will, we hope, make Vermont the first state in the country to urge Congress to take appropriate steps to limit this kind of corporate abuse of our political system. And that's a great opportunity for Vermont to lead. So thank you, Senator Lyons, Senator Kalina, and others in the legislature who we think can make that happen. We've got a great opportunity. There's another anniversary coming up on January 21st, which is just after the legislative session starts, to maybe show up at the legislature and urge your reps and senators to get on board with this kind of a resolution. That's even before town meeting day and the organizing going on around that as well. But it's not just about the resolution, I would say. I mean, it's be wonderful for Vermont to take the lead and show what can be done there, but I want to suggest that there are legislative actions that could be taken here as well. We could require, even as a state, that if corporations are going to be involved in our political campaigns here, that they get shareholder approval before doing so. And that is something that could, again, present really a leadership role for Vermont and show what can be done, even within the confines of this very, very bad decision by the Supreme Court. There's more that can be done on campaign finance here as well in Vermont. Vermont led the way with a very bold campaign finance law over a decade ago, and that limited both spending and contributions. That was struck down by the same Supreme Court a few years ago, and we have tried several times since then to put back into place common sense limits on what individuals, PACs, political parties, even corporations can give to candidates. And that hasn't passed. It actually passed twice and was vetoed twice by Governor Douglas, and we fell one vote short twice of overriding his veto. It's time to get that law passed once and for all this year. So there's more that can be done on the campaign finance. I'd be happy to talk with anybody about that. You know, and frankly, there's more that can be done on corporate, more direct campaigns aimed at corporations as well. There's shareholder resolutions and political pressure that we can apply so that they do not engage in politics or political abuse in this way. I'd love to talk to folks about all of those things. Tonight's not the night to talk about energy policy, I would say, but let me just say that of all the 500 people in this room, I'm sure there are a number of issues on which we may disagree. Tonight's a night for us to find common ground in trying to solve this problem that the Supreme Court caused with these couple of decisions. So let's build on that, find common ground, make Vermont a leader, and address this problem. Thanks.
My name.
You're good. You're good.
My name is Rick Hausman. I'm the Director of Research and Advocacy for Clean Yield Asset Management. We're in Norwich and Greensboro. And I wanted to mention something that I hadn't thought about talking about, but David Cobb mentioned shareholder primacy. Vermont has led the way, Vermont and Maryland, with creating the Vermont Benefit Corporation.
Right.
And that particular entity, and Clean Yield is one of two that exist now currently in the state. And the idea behind it is that shareholders are not, and finance is not the only bottom line. The community, the benefit to the community, the benefit to all of the stakeholders who are involved in Clean Yield's activities are involved. No corporation outside can take over Clean Yield without considering all of those social factors that are separate from the finance part. And it's part of our corporate charter. We had to be rechartered in the state a year or so ago. It was last July 1st, in fact, this past July 1st. What I wanted to just briefly mention, Jennifer covered very nicely, one of the attributes of social investing is shareholder activism. The other two are corporate screening and community investing. But shareholder activism is what really brought us to think about this forum. We were very frustrated, frankly, because we have corporate accountability shareholder actions that we do with 500-word resolutions that we present to corporations. Corporations don't like these resolutions. They get voted on proxy ballots, and corporations then are willing to talk with us about things like transparency in who they will donate to, whether they will participate in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And so our shareholder actions at this point, and we do these as an industry, by the way, we cooperate across religious organizations, unions, environmental organizations like Greenpeace and United States PIRG, and jointly we file these resolutions that, for instance, in the case of political accountability, they're very, very soft because the SEC won't let us do much in the way of really pointed resolutions, which would change things. But we're asking that in a few cases that there be no money devoted to lobbying or to political contributions. More often, we ask that there be a subcommittee of the board that is responsible for all political contributions. And in particular, we ask about transparency. We just are, but again, these are what they call precatory. They're always asking, and corporations can voluntarily do this, set up a nice policy, and then violate that policy. So we as an industry, find ourselves frustrated, and we're looking for the kind of impetus that you folks here tonight are bringing to this issue.
Thank you, Rick.
So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. Good.
So my sense is this is just the beginning of a much longer conversation we're going to have here in Vermont. And thank you all for coming. Thanks to our sponsors and to our panelists. And then I'll invite you all to join us in the community room for some ice cream and further conversation.